My name is Clara Vance, and I am 29 years old. 6 months ago, my mother stood in front of a room full of local reporters, city council members, and our entire extended family to announce that my cousin, Chloe, was the new chief executive officer of Vance Maritime Logistics. She handed Chloe the ceremonial silver key to the historic port building, a company that my grandfather spent 50 years building from a single rotting dock into a multi-million-dollar empire. My mother didn't look at me once during that entire speech. I was sitting in the very back row, next to the catering staff, wearing a cheap blazer I bought on clearance. When the applause died down, my mother leaned into the microphone and said, "We are finally placing this legacy into the hands of someone who actually cares about family loyalty, not someone who ran away to a big city to chase a cold corporate paycheck." She was talking about me. For 7 years, my family branded me as the greedy, unstable daughter because I refused to work for free under my mother's chaotic management, choosing instead to move 3 states away to earn my degree in maritime law. They told everyone in our hometown that I abandoned them. They blocked my calls. They ignored my graduation from law school. They didn't even invite me to Thanksgiving. For 7 years, I was treated like a ghost. But yesterday morning, the local news broke a massive story. Under Chloe's absolute incompetence and reckless management, an international cargo ship carrying $30 million worth of critical pharmaceutical supplies was completely seized at our city's deepwater port due to catastrophic regulatory violations. The entire Vance empire was facing immediate, total bankruptcy, along with massive federal lawsuits. At exactly 2 in the afternoon yesterday, the glass doors of my private law practice 3 states away flew open. My mother and my cousin Chloe marched inside, their faces pale, their eyes swollen from crying, surrounded by 2 senior attorneys who looked entirely terrified. My mother dropped a heavy, leather-bound folder onto my mahogany desk, gripped the edges until her knuckles turned white, and looked at me for the first time in nearly a decade. Before we get into the heavy details of what happened next, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. But only do so if this story truly connects with you. And right now, please drop your current location and your exact local time in the comments below. I read every single comment, and I genuinely want to know where in the world you are listening from today. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. To understand how we arrived at that frozen moment in my law office, you have to understand the dynamic of the Vance family. My grandfather, Arthur Vance, was a force of nature. He was a giant of a man with thick, weathered hands who smelled of sea salt, old paper, and machine oil. He built Vance Maritime Logistics with nothing but grit. To him, the shipping industry wasn't just about moving steel boxes across the ocean. It was about precision, structural integrity, honoring contracts, and protecting the hundreds of dock workers who relied on him for their livelihoods. He had 2 children, my mother, Alina, and my uncle, Robert. Uncle Robert was Chloe's father. He passed away when Chloe was just a teenager, and from that exact moment, my mother adopted an intense, fiercely protective obsession with Chloe. Chloe was the golden child. She was 3 years younger than me, beautiful, highly dramatic, and an absolute master of emotional manipulation. She could drop a single tear at a family dinner and convince my mother to buy her a brand new car. She excelled at looking important while doing absolutely nothing. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one. I inherited my grandfather's obsession with the actual mechanics of the business. While Chloe was taking tennis lessons and attending social galas funded by the company, I was down at the docks with my grandfather. By the time I was 16, I could read a cargo manifest faster than any clerk in the main office. I knew the difference between Panamax and post-Panamax vessels. I understood the complex labyrinth of international maritime law before I even had a driver's license. Grandfather saw this. He would sit me down in his old leather chair, point his thick finger at the maps on his wall, and say, "Clara, a shipping company isn't run from a ballroom. It's run in the fine print. It's run by the person who understands the rules of the water. Never let anyone tell you that looking the part is the same as doing the work." But my mother didn't see it that way. Alina Vance was a woman obsessed entirely with social standing and appearances. She hated the grime of the docks. She wanted Vance Maritime Logistics to be a prestigious country club badge. and she firmly believed that Chloe was the perfect face for that image. The real rift began 7 years ago, right after my 22-year-old college graduation. I had just earned my undergraduate degree in logistics, and I naturally assumed I would finally be given a formal, paid position as an operations manager at the firm. I wanted to modernize our tracking systems and clean up our aging compliance protocols. I remember the family meeting like it was yesterday. We were sitting in the formal dining room of my mother's large estate. The table was covered in fine china. My mother sat at the head, Chloe sat to her right, texting under the table, and I sat across from them. "Clara," my mother had said, her voice smooth and completely unyielding. "We've structured the new operational chart for the next fiscal year. Chloe will be taking over as the Director of Public Relations and Corporate Strategy. Her starting salary will be $95,000, plus a company vehicle allowance." I stared at her, completely stunned. Chloe had just dropped out of her second marketing program at a local community college. She didn't know the difference between a bill of lading and a grocery list. "And what about me, Mom?" I asked, trying to keep my voice completely level. "I've spent the last 4 years studying logistics. I've worked on the docks every summer since I was 16. My mother waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. "You will be the Assistant Logistics Coordinator. It's an unpaid internship for the first 2 years, Clara. We need to see if you have true loyalty to this family legacy before we commit corporate funds to you. You should be grateful to learn from the ground up." I looked at Chloe. She gave me a tiny, incredibly smug smile from behind her phone. She knew exactly what she was doing. She had spent weeks whispering in my mother's ear, telling her that I was too independent, that I wanted to take over the company and push everyone else out, that I didn't respect my mother's authority. "An unpaid internship," I whispered. "Mom, I have student loans. I have rent. How am I supposed to survive while Chloe makes nearly 6 figures for taking photos at charity events?" "If you truly cared about the Vance name, you wouldn't be counting pennies," my mother snapped, her tone instantly turning ice cold. "Chloe represents the grace of this family. You have an aggressive, stubborn attitude, just like your grandfather did in his final years. If you don't accept this position under these exact terms, then you are proving to me right now that you only care about yourself." That was the exact moment something broke inside me. I looked at the two of them, and I realized that no matter how hard I worked, no matter how many compliance codes I memorized, I would always be the invisible daughter, expected to do all the heavy lifting while the golden child took all the credit and the cash. "No," I said quietly. My mother froze. "What did you just say?" "I said no," I repeated, standing up from the table. "I'm not working for free to fund Chloe's lifestyle. If my skills aren't worth a living wage to this company, then I will take them somewhere else." Chloe gasped dramatically, leaning over to grab my mother's arm. "Aunt Alina, look how she's speaking to you. She's threatening us. I told you she didn't care about grandfather's legacy." "Walk out that door, Clara," my mother whispered, her face twisted in absolute fury. "Walk out right now. But know this. If you leave this family business when we are offering you a chance to prove your loyalty, you are entirely dead to me. You will not receive a single dime of assistance. You will not be welcome in my house. You will be a complete stranger to this family." I didn't say another word. I walked up to my room, packed everything I owned into 3 cardboard boxes, and drove away that very night. I moved 3 states away to a bustling port city. It was incredibly brutal at first. I worked 40 hours a week as a night clerk at a commercial shipping yard just to pay for my tiny, damp basement apartment, while attending law school full-time during the day. There were nights when dinner was a single sleeve of saltine crackers and a glass of tap water. My joints ached from the freezing cold of the winter docks, and my eyes burned from reading heavy legal textbooks under the dim light of a desk lamp until 3 in the morning. During those 7 long years, I tried to reach out. I called my mother when I passed my first-year law exams. The call went straight to voicemail. I sent a beautiful handwritten card for her 55th birthday. It was returned to my sender address, unopened, with the word "refused" written across the front in my mother's sharp, unmistakable handwriting. When I graduated at the top of my law class and secured a prestigious fellowship in maritime law, I sent an email invitation to the ceremony. Chloe replied from my mother's account with a single sentence: "Please stop harassing us. We have moved on." It hurt. It hurt in a way that words can't fully describe. I cried myself to sleep on more nights than I care to admit. But eventually, the tears stopped, and a cold, absolute resilience took their place. I realized that boundaries aren't walls built to hurt other people. They are heavy security doors built to protect your own sanity. I poured all my grief, all my anger, and all my unresolved pain into my work. By the age of 28, I had opened my own independent practice, specializing in complex international shipping litigation, regulatory compliance, and maritime asset protection. I became known in my new city as the attorney you call when a case is completely unwinnable. Meanwhile, back in my hometown, things were changing rapidly. My grandfather, Arthur Vance, had been declining in health for years. He was living in a specialized memory care facility, suffering from severe, advanced dementia. He barely recognized his own face in the mirror, let alone his family. My mother had taken total control of his personal affairs through a temporary medical power of attorney. Then, 14 months ago, my grandfather passed away. I wasn't told about the funeral. I only found out 3 days after he was buried, when an old dock foreman who used to work with my grandfather called my office to express his condolences. He assumed I had been there. I remember sitting in my office chair, holding the phone, feeling a completely numb, hollow void open up in my chest. My grandfather was the only person who had ever truly seen me, the only one who believed in me, and I hadn't even been allowed to stand by his grave. 2 months after his passing, my mother made her big public announcement. She held the massive press conference at the port, officially declaring Chloe the sole CEO of Vance Maritime Logistics. My mother claimed that before his mind completely faded, grandfather had signed a brand new, updated will, completely bypassing me and leaving the entire corporate structure, the land, the docks, and the voting shares exclusively to my mother and Chloe. I didn't contest it at the time. I was too exhausted, too deeply hurt, and entirely focused on building my own practice. I figured if they wanted to run the company into the ground, it was their choice. I was completely done playing their twisted emotional games. But as it turns out, you can run from your family, but you cannot run from the absolute rules of maritime law. Let's pause right here for a brief moment. Before we move into the devastating events that brought them crashing back into my life, I want to ask you a very serious question. If your own mother had cut you off completely for 7 years and skipped your proudest life achievements, would you ever accept a phone call from her again? Write your thoughts down in the comments section below. I genuinely want to know how you would handle this level of betrayal. Now, let's look at exactly what happened yesterday afternoon in my law office. My mother and Chloe were sitting across from me. Chloe was wearing a designer silk trench coat, but her eyes were completely red and frantic. She was chewing her manicured fingernails down to the quick. My mother looked 10 years older than the last time I saw her on television. Her expensive tailored suit looked wrinkled, and her hands were visibly shaking. "Clara," my mother opened, her voice cracking slightly, stripped of all its usual arrogant authority. "We don't have time for ancient history. We are facing an absolute catastrophe, and your corporate phone line was the only one our senior legal advisors recommended. We need you to take over our defense immediately." I looked down at the heavy leather folder she had dropped onto my desk. I didn't touch it. I slowly leaned back in my chair, crossed my arms, and looked my mother dead in the eye. "Eleanor," I said, using her first name deliberately, my voice entirely calm and professional. "You are 3 states outside your jurisdiction. The last time we spoke, you told me I was completely dead to this family. Why on earth would you think you can walk into my private practice and demand my services?" Chloe leaned forward, her voice rising in a high-pitched, panicked whine. "Clara, please, you don't understand. The Federal Maritime Commission just arrested the SS Blue Horizon at Pier 4. They've locked down the entire shipping terminal. The cargo belongs to an international pharmaceutical conglomerate, and it contains temperature-sensitive medical supplies worth millions. Every single hour that ship sits at the dock under federal seizure, we are being fined $50,000. If the cargo spoils, the liability insurance won't cover it because of gross negligence. We will lose everything. The company will be entirely liquidated by next week." I remained completely unmoved. I pulled a pen from my holder and balanced it between my fingers. "And let me guess, Chloe, why exactly did the federal authorities seize the vessel?" One of the senior attorneys sitting behind my mother cleared his throat nervously, stepping forward. "Ms. Vance, the corporate office failed to file the mandatory International Hazardous Materials Clearance manifests. Furthermore, the ship's foreign maritime safety certifications had been expired for over 9 months. The CEO's office signed off on the voyage anyway, completely bypassing the automated compliance locks to save on dry dock maintenance fees." I let out a short, cold, entirely humorless laugh. Bypassing compliance locks to save money. It was the classic, lazy shortcut of someone who didn't understand that the laws of the ocean do not care about your corporate profit margins. "That is gross criminal negligence," I said plainly. "The federal government has every right to seize that vessel. You didn't just break a minor rule, Chloe. You violated international maritime safety acts. You're lucky you aren't sitting in a federal holding cell right now." "Clara, enough," my mother pleaded, reaching across the desk to touch my hand. I pulled my hand away smoothly, entirely out of her reach, her eyes filled with tears. "We know mistakes were made. Chloe is young, she was under an immense amount of pressure. But this is your grandfather's legacy. If the company goes bankrupt, everything Arthur Vance built will be entirely destroyed. Do you want his life's work to be wiped out because of a prideful grudge?" "Do not speak to me about my grandfather's legacy," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper that made Chloe flinch. "You barred me from his funeral. You stole his final years from me. You didn't care about his legacy when you were printing Chloe's face on promotional brochures. You only care about it now because the walls are closing in on you." The room fell into an absolute, suffocating silence. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on my wall. My mother swallowed hard, her chest heaving. She reached into her expensive designer purse and pulled out a second document. It was a faded, legal-sized piece of paper with an official notary stamp from our hometown, dated exactly 3 weeks before my grandfather passed away. "We brought the corporate archive files, Clara," my mother whispered, her voice trembling violently. "We needed to show you the full asset breakdown so you could draft the emergency injunction to release the ship. Our local corporate lawyers were going through your grandfather's safe yesterday morning to pull the original port deeds, and they found this." She slid the paper across the desk toward me. "What is this?" I asked, my eyes narrowing. "It's your grandfather's actual, original last will and testament," the senior attorney behind her explained, his voice completely hushed. "The one your mother announced at the press conference last year was a modified amendment that had been drafted by a local copy clerk. But this is the master document that was locked in his private commercial vault at the port." I slowly picked up the paper. My eyes scanned down the lines of crisp, old legal typography. I reached the section labeled * distribution of corporate equity and voting directorship. As I read the words written by my grandfather's own legal counsel, my blood turned entirely to ice. The room seemed to lose all its oxygen. The document explicitly stated that my mother, Eleanor Vance, was to receive the residential real estate assets only. It stated that my cousin, Chloe, was to receive a small, fixed monthly educational annuity, capped at 4 years. But the entire corporate structure of Vance Maritime Logistics, the shipping lines, the deepwater port deeds, the warehouse properties, and 51% of all voting corporate shares, had been left entirely, unconditionally, and exclusively to me, Clara Vance. And then my eyes hit the most terrifying detail at the very bottom of the page. The date on this original, authentic master will was asterisk after asterisk the date on the fraudulent amendment my mother had used to install Chloe as CEO. I looked up from the paper, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. I looked at my mother's pale, trembling face, and then I looked at Chloe, who was hyperventilating into her hands. "You knew," I whispered. the realization hitting me like a physical blow to the stomach. The amendment you used to take the company and put Chloe in charge. You knew it was completely fake. You forged my grandfather's signature while he was locked in that memory care facility, didn't you? My mother completely broke down, covering her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. Clara, please. We had to protect the company. We thought you were gone forever. But before I could even process the absolute magnitude of their criminal betrayal, the senior attorney's cell phone began to ring loudly. He answered it, listened for exactly 5 seconds, and his face completely drained of all color. He dropped his phone onto my desk, looking directly at me with eyes full of absolute terror. Ms. Vance, the attorney choked out. That was the Port Authority. The Federal Bureau of Investigation just arrived at the corporate headquarters with a criminal search warrant for corporate fraud and asset forgery. They are walking into the building right now. The senior attorney's words hung in the air like a heavy, suffocating fog. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was at our corporate headquarters back home, executing a criminal search warrant for corporate fraud and asset forgery. My mother let out a sharp, choked gasp and collapsed backward into her chair, her face draining of what little color it had left. Chloe instantly sprang to her feet, her expensive designer handbag slipping from her shoulder and crashing to the floor, spilling lipstick and compact mirrors across my neat office rug. She began packing frantically, her breathing coming in short, ragged bursts as she clutched at her hair. Oh my God, Chloe shrieked, her voice completely stripped of its usual rehearsed poise. They're going to look through my office computer, Aunt Alina. They're going to see the digital signature files we uploaded from the memory care facility. They're going to find the email logs. I told you we should have burned the original paperwork. I told you. Chloe, shut up, my mother hissed through clenched teeth, her voice trembling violently as she tried to glance at the 2 senior attorneys standing behind her. But it was far too late. The absolute confession had already left Chloe's mouth, echoing clearly off the glass walls of my private practice. I sat completely motionless behind my desk. I didn't yell. I didn't storm out. I simply looked down at the authentic master my grandfather had drawn up, the one leaving the entire shipping empire exclusively to me, and then looked at the 2 terrified women across from me. The deep, aching pain of being abandoned by my own blood for 7 years suddenly hardened into an icy, unyielding analytical clarity. Sit down, Chloe, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried an absolute weight that made her instantly freeze in her tracks. She looked at me, her lower lip quivering, and slowly sank back into her seat like a scolded child. I turned my gaze to the senior attorney who had dropped the phone. Tell the port authorities and our local office staff to cooperate fully with the federal agents. Do not delete a single file. Do not turn off a single server. If anyone attempts to obstruct that warrant, they will be facing federal obstruction charges on top of conspiracy to commit grand larceny. The attorney nodded frantically, his hands shaking as he picked up his phone and hurried out into my office hallway to execute the commands. Before we dive into the dark, hidden details of how my mother and Chloe pulled off this massive criminal forgery while my grandfather lay helpless in a medical ward, let's pause for a very specific moment. If you are watching this right now, and you believe that absolute justice always finds a way, please type the word karma in the comments section below. I read every single one of your responses, and I want to see how many of you believe in true accountability when the truth finally comes to light. Now, let's look closely at the absolute breakdown that occurred in my office over the next hour. With the senior attorneys forced to wait outside, my mother finally realized she had nowhere left to hide. The polished, elite facade she had maintained for decades completely shattered. She looked at me, her eyes hollow, tears tracking through her expensive makeup. Clara, please, she whispered, her voice cracking with deep, agonizing desperation. You have to save us. If the federal authorities prove the will was forged, Chloe and I are going to prison. The Vance family name will be dragged through the absolute mud. Your grandfather's entire legacy will become a joke on the local news. You didn't care about the Vance family name when you took a pen and forged a dying man's signature, Alina, I said, my voice completely deadpan. Walk me through it. Exactly how did you do it? My mother swallowed hard, looking down at her trembling hands. The story that emerged was darker and more calculated than I ever could have imagined. 2 years ago, when my grandfather's dementia reached a critical stage where he could no longer remember what year it was, the operational costs of the shipping firm began to fluctuate. My mother had already been quietly diverting corporate funds to pay for Chloe's lavish lifestyle, the European vacations, the luxury sports car, the high-end apartment lease. When the head accountant at the time flagged these massive discrepancies, my mother panicked. She knew that under my grandfather's original estate plan, an independent audit would be triggered automatically upon his passing. More importantly, she knew that grandfather had explicitly left the controlling shares and directorship to me, because he knew I was the only one capable of maintaining the firm's strict structural and legal integrity. We found the master will in his home office safe while he was being moved to the care facility, Chloe whimpered, interjecting as she wiped her nose with a tissue. Aunt Alina saw that you were getting everything that actually mattered. The Deepwater deeds, the ships, the voting control. I was only getting a tiny educational annuity. It wasn't fair. You had already left town. You weren't even working there anymore. I left because you and my mother forced me out by demanding I work as an unpaid intern, while you collected a 6-figure salary for doing absolutely nothing. I shot back, my voice sharp as a razor. Chloe looked away, unable to hold my gaze. My mother continued the confession, her voice barely a whisper. She explained how they hired a corrupt, disgraced notary from a neighboring county. They brought a modified, completely fraudulent will amendment into the memory care unit on an evening when my grandfather was heavily medicated and completely disoriented. They guided his hand to sign the paper, witnessed by a medical clerk who didn't bother to check his cognitive status. With that forged document, my mother assumed total control. She hid the authentic master will in a private commercial safe at the port, intending to destroy it once the estate probate period completely closed. But because of Chloe's absolute incompetence as the new CEO, the company's legal filings fell into utter chaos, and the safe was left untouched until yesterday morning, when their defense lawyers frantically searched the archive vault for the port property deeds to fight the federal ship seizure. We didn't think the federal government would ever get involved. Clara, my mother cried out, reaching across the desk again, her voice full of an agonizing emotional breakdown. We just wanted to keep the legacy in our immediate circle. I am your mother. I raised you. Yes, I favored Chloe, but I never imagined it would lead to federal agents locking down our corporate office. If you take this master will to the FBI, you are sending your own mother to a federal penitentiary. I looked at her, and for a split second, a profound wave of deep, unadulterated sadness washed over me. This was the woman who had tucked me into bed when I was a little girl. This was the woman who taught me how to read. But this was also the exact same woman who had completely erased me from her life for 7 long years, who had blocked my number when I begged for a single word of support during my hardest law school finals, and who had barred me from saying a final goodbye to the grandfather who adored me. You chose your path, Alina, I said quietly, the sadness instantly melting back into cold concrete. You chose to commit a major felony to feed Chloe's greed, and you chose to sacrifice me to do it. You didn't come to my law office today because you love me or because you feel guilty. You came here because you know I am a master of maritime law, and you wanted to use my brain to cover up your criminal tracks. Please, Clara, Chloe sobbed, dropping to her knees right beside my desk, completely abandoning all her pride. She grabbed the fabric of my trousers, her face twisted in pure terror. Don't do this to us. If I get a criminal record, my life is completely over. I'll lose my social standing, my friends, everything. We'll give you whatever you want. Just find a way to make the federal case go away. I looked down at Chloe kneeling at my feet. For 7 years, she had been the untouchable golden child, smiling smugly while I packed my life into cardboard boxes. Now, she was weeping on the floor of the office I built with my own sweat, blood, and sleepless nights. Slowly, deliberately, I leaned forward and reached down to pull her hands off my clothing. I stood up from my executive chair, walked over to the wide glass windows of my office, and looked down at the bustling city streets below. A dark, incredibly precise plan began to form in my mind. I was an expert in maritime law. I knew exactly how the Federal Maritime Commission and the FBI operated in asset forgery cases. If I simply handed the authentic master will over to the agents right now, the company would be plunged into an immediate, multi-year probate legal battle. The federal government would permanently freeze all corporate bank accounts. The seized cargo ship would remain locked at Pier 4. The $30 million worth of pharmaceuticals would spoil, and the resulting civil liabilities would completely bankrupt Vance Maritime Logistics before I could ever take my rightful place as the owner. My grandfather's life's work would be entirely erased by the courts. I couldn't let that happen. I had to save the empire, but to do it, I had to completely dismantle my mother and Chloe first. I turned around slowly, my face an unreadable, icy mask. "Get up, Chloe," I commanded. She scrambled back onto her chair, wiping her eyes, looking at me with a desperate, pathetic glimmer of hope. My mother leaned forward, holding her breath. "I'm going to handle this case," I announced clearly. My mother let out a massive, weeping sigh of relief, clutching her chest. "Oh, thank God, Clara, thank God. I knew you wouldn't abandon your own flesh and blood." "Do not misinterpret my actions, Alina," I interrupted, my voice dropping to a low, chilling register that cut through her relief like a knife. "I am not saving you. I am saving my grandfather's company, and my assistance comes with a set of absolute, non-negotiable conditions." I walked back to my desk, picked up a fresh piece of legal stationery, and began writing rapidly with my fountain pen. "Condition number 1, I said, looking directly at Chloe. "You will sign an immediate, total resignation from the position of Chief Executive Officer, effective at exactly 3 o'clock today. You will forfeit all corporate credit cards, company vehicles, and expense accounts by midnight tonight. You will never set foot on any Vance property or dock ever again." Chloe gasped, opening her mouth to protest, but my mother immediately slapped her hand down on Chloe's arm, silencing her. "We accept. What else?" "Condition number 2, I continued, turning my eyes to my mother. "You will sign a full, legally binding proxy disclosure. You will transfer 100% of your current corporate voting rights and executive decision-making authority to me, permanently. From this hour forward, I hold absolute dictatorial control over Vance Maritime Logistics." My mother's jaw tightened. This was her entire source of social power back home. To hand it over to the daughter she had publicly humiliated was an absolute, devastating blow to her immense pride. "And what about the FBI, Clara?" the senior attorney asked as he walked back into the room, his face incredibly tense. "How do we handle the forgery investigation without them finding out the truth?" I gave a cold, calculated smile. "The federal agents are investigating a corporate structure that currently lists Chloe and Alina as the principal officers. But under maritime estate law, if the authentic master will is formally verified and filed before an indictment is issued, the ownership of the company retroactively transfers to me from the exact date of my grandfather's passing." I leaned across the desk, looking at my mother. "Which means, when I walk into the federal field office tomorrow morning, I will not be walking in as your defense lawyer. I will be walking in as the sole owner and CEO of Vance Logistics. I will personally handle the compliance fines, and I will personally settle the cargo dispute. But to protect the company from being seized as a criminal asset, I will be forced to present the full evidence of your forgery to the federal prosecutor to prove that your management was entirely unauthorized from day one." My mother stood up so fast her chair screeched against the floor. "Clara, you said you were saving us. If you hand that evidence to the prosecutor, we will still face criminal charges." "I am saving you from a 20-year maximum sentence for grand federal fraud," I replied with absolute calmness. "By coming forward under my corporate directorship, I can negotiate a specialized plea agreement for immediate corporate restitution. You won't go to a maximum security prison, but you will sign a full confession. You will complete 3 years of strict house arrest, and you will pay an absolute civil penalty that will entirely drain your personal savings accounts." I slid the legal stationery across the desk, along with a heavy black pen. Those are my absolute terms, I said, leaning back and crossing my arms. You can sign these emergency resignation and proxy transfer deeds right now, walk out of here, and let me manage the federal fallout tomorrow. Or you can walk out that door right now, wait for the FBI to arrest you at your hotel tonight, and face the absolute maximum penalty under federal law without a single shred of legal protection from me. Chloe looked at the paper, then looked at my mother, her entire body shaking with deep, primitive terror. My mother stared at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of intense hatred and utter, broken defeat. She realized that the quiet, invisible daughter she had discarded 7 years ago had just completely outmaneuvered her in a matter of minutes. Slowly, with a trembling hand, my mother picked up the pen. But just as the tip of the pen touched the signature line, the glass doors of my main reception lobby shattered with a loud, violent crash. A booming voice echoed through my office hallway, instantly freezing everyone in the room. The sound of shattering glass in my reception lobby echoed down the corridor, immediately freezing my mother's hand as the pen hovered millimeters above the signature line. Chloe let out a sharp, terrified squeak and pulled her hands back to her chest, her eyes wide with a frantic, primitive panic. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, nobody move, stay exactly where you are." A powerful, deep voice boomed through the hallway. The heavy footsteps of multiple combat boots crunched over the broken glass, moving with absolute tactical precision directly toward my private office suite. The door to my office swung open completely. 4 federal agents clad in dark tactical vests with FBI stamped boldly across the front stepped inside, followed immediately by a sharp-eyed woman in a tailored charcoal suit carrying a thick, leather-bound briefcase. Her badge was clipped to her belt, catching the sharp, fluorescent light of my office. "Clara Vance," the woman in the charcoal suit asked, her voice entirely flat, clinical, and completely unbothered by the emotional meltdown occurring in the room. "I am Clara Vance," I said, my voice remaining entirely level, my posture rigid and confident behind my mahogany desk. "And you are Special Agent in Charge Miller, I assume from the Federal Maritime Division." She gave a single, curt nod, stepping past my trembling mother. "We've spent the last 6 hours executing a warrant at your family's port headquarters 3 states away. The digital forensic team successfully intercepted an outgoing server wipe command, recovering full email communications and unauthorized signature uploads originating from the Shady Pines Memory Care Facility. We traced the metadata straight to Chloe Vance's corporate account." Chloe collapsed completely onto the floor, buried her face in her arms, and began weeping hysterically, her entire body shaking with deep, uncontrollable terror. My mother looked like she was about to have a massive medical emergency. She reached out toward me, her voice a pathetic, wheezing whisper. "Clara, please, do something. You're our lawyer, tell them." Before we look at the absolute, shocking twist that entirely changed the trajectory of this legal battle, let's take a final brief pause. If you are watching this right now, and you believe that family loyalty should never be used as an excuse to cover up a federal crime, please type the word "enough" in the comments section below. I want to see how many of you believe that boundaries must be completely absolute when dealing with narcissistic or toxic family structures. Now, let's look at the absolute climax of that afternoon. Special Agent Miller stepped up to my desk and opened her leather briefcase, pulling out a set of official federal arrest warrants. "Eleanor Vance and Chloe Vance, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit federal maritime fraud, wire fraud, and the absolute forgery of federally protected port asset deeds. Step away from the desk and place your hands behind your back." "Wait," I said clearly. The federal agents paused, their hands hovering near their restraints. Agent Miller turned her sharp, clinical gaze to me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Ms. Vance, with all due respect, your family's local corporate lawyers may have given you a call, but you have not formally filed an entry of appearance as their defense counsel in this district. If you intend to obstruct the execution of a federal warrant, you will be placed in restraints right alongside them." "I am not their defense counsel, Agent Miller," I replied calmly. I picked up the original, authentic master will that my mother had slid across my desk just minutes prior. the one with the pristine notary stamp dated asterisk after asterisk their fraudulent amendment. I stood up slowly from my chair, walked around the mahogany desk, and handed the document directly to the lead agent. I am the sole owner, principal director, and chief executive officer of Vance Maritime Logistics, I announced, my voice echoing with an absolute, unshakable authority. This is the authentic last will and testament of Arthur Vance. It has been verified and stamped by the State Probate Archive Office as of 9 o'clock yesterday morning. As you can see from the certified date markers, the fraudulent amendment used by Alina and Chloe Vance to install themselves into corporate office was entirely unauthorized and legally void from inception. Agent Miller took the document, her analytical eyes scanning the legal typography, the official notary watermarks, and the precise signature lines. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by Chloe's distant, muffled sobbing on the rug. Under the absolute tenets of maritime estate law and retroactive corporate succession, I continued, stepping closer, any regulatory violations, compliance failures, or fraudulent asset transfers executed by an unauthorized party do not bind the corporate entity itself once the true executor takes possession. I am coming forward immediately as a whistle-blowing principal asset holder. I am formally reporting the criminal actions of Alina and Chloe Vance to your field office. My mother's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a mixture of intense, burning hatred and utter, broken disbelief. Clara, you monster, you betrayed us. You engineered this entire thing. You're sending your own mother to prison. You sent yourself to prison the exact moment you forged a dying man's signature to rob the daughter who actually cared about his life's work, Alina, I said, looking down at her with an absolute, chilling calm. For 7 years, you told the world I was dead to you. You barred me from saying goodbye to my grandfather. You treated me like an invisible stranger until you needed my brain to save you from your own criminal greed. I am not betraying this family. I am finally protecting my grandfather's legacy from the parasites who tried to bleed it dry. Agent Miller looked up from the master will, a tiny, rare smirk appearing on her otherwise frozen face. She looked at her fellow agents and nodded. Secure the targets. The federal agent stepped forward instantly. Within seconds, the sharp, metallic clicks of handcuffs echoed through my quiet office suite. Chloe was lifted to her feet, her designer trench coat completely wrinkled, her face stained with black mascara as she shrieked for mercy. My mother remained completely rigid, her head bowed in absolute, public humiliation as the steel cuffs locked around her wrists. Clara Vance, Agent Miller said, adjusting her briefcase. As the documented legal owner of Vance Logistics, you will need to accompany us to the federal field office to sign the formal asset restitution disclosures and settle the compliance injunctions regarding the SS Blue Horizon. My corporate vehicle is already waiting downstairs, Agent Miller, I replied smoothly, picking up my briefcase and slipping the authentic master will inside. And I have already drafted the emergency regulatory compliance manifests to release the medical cargo at Pier 4. The ship will be moving by midnight tonight. As the federal agents escorted my mother and Chloe out through my shattered lobby, a small crowd of local business owners and office workers gathered in the hallway, whispering and staring at the absolute fall of the once-proud Alina Vance. My mother turned her head back one last time, her lips trembling, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of a single tear or an angry shout. I simply watched her go, the heavy glass security doors of my practice closing behind them with a solid, definitive click. The resolution of the federal case moved with absolute, terrifying speed over the next 3 months. Because I came forward immediately with the authentic master will and fully cooperated with the federal forensic audit, the Federal Maritime Commission completely waived the criminal asset seizure against Vance Logistics. I personally negotiated a reduced civil penalty for the compliance violations, funding the settlement entirely by liquidating Chloe's luxury corporate vehicles, her high-end downtown apartment lease, and my mother's expensive country club real estate assets. Chloe and my mother had no choice but to sign a full, comprehensive federal plea agreement to avoid a maximum security prison sentence. Under the absolute terms of the final judgment, Chloe was sentenced to 2 years of strict house arrest at a small, remote rental property, followed by 5 years of intensive federal probation. She was forced to take a minimum wage job at a local retail outlet just to pay off her massive civil restitution fines. Her elite social standing was completely, irreversibly destroyed. My mother, due to her age and lack of prior criminal history, avoided immediate incarceration, but was placed under 3 years of strict electronic monitoring and house arrest. Her personal savings accounts were completely drained to cover the legal fees and structural restitution penalties. She now lives in total isolation, completely ignored by the elite social circles she spent her entire life trying to impress. And as for me, last month, I officially moved back to my hometown to take my rightful place as the sole chief executive officer of Vance Maritime Logistics. I walked through the front doors of the historic port building, wearing a tailored Navy suit, surrounded by the old dock foremen who had worked alongside my grandfather for decades. They didn't see an invisible daughter. They saw a master of maritime law who had single-handedly saved their jobs, their families, and their livelihoods from absolute destruction. I walked into my grandfather's old corner office. The room still smelled faintly of sea salt, old paper, and machine oil. I walked over to the wide glass windows and looked out at the massive deepwater port, watching a giant post-Panamax cargo ship glide smoothly into the harbor, its horn blaring across the water like a triumphant roar. I looked down at the old leather chair where my grandfather used to sit, and I smiled, a deep, incredibly satisfying warmth finally filling the void that had lived in my chest for 7 long years. Boundaries aren't built to hurt people. They are built to protect the things that truly matter. I had survived the cold, the hunger, and the absolute isolation of being discarded by my own blood. And in the end, I didn't just build my own success. I took back the empire that was always mine.